"You're a relic," he said. "Be gone." That's how it ended. No ceremony. No handshake worth remembering. Just those 4 words from a man whose business card still had the sheen of a fresh print job. Kyle Durbin, 33, maybe 34. Soft hands. Tighter pants than any man in leadership should wear. The kind of guy who brings a ring light to a Zoom call. He didn't look me in the eye when he said it. Just stared at his tablet like I was an error code blinking on the screen. "My name's Thomas Ray. I'm 52 years old, and until 9/7 this morning, I was the Senior Regional Account Director at Sterling Performance Logistics. 29 years. Arizona, Nevada, Utah. I was the guy who cleaned up messes when new hires screwed up orders. Who hand-delivered contracts to clients who hated email. Who built trust in territories corporate forgot even existed. And now I was being erased like a typo." Kyle used the word transition, said the company was moving in a new direction, that my legacy knowledge was appreciated but no longer aligned with market innovation. I knew corporate speak fluently. I'd watched generations of execs rise and flame out like sparklers. Kyle wasn't saying anything I hadn't heard before, except the part about handing my region to his golfing buddy, Darren Latham. That was new. I'd met Darren once. Smiled too much, wore a Rolex and talked about wine like he owned a vineyard. He didn't know a thing about the cold chain logistics game, but Kyle had him on the course every Sunday. Said Darren had vision. I'd seen his kind before. Loud ideas, soft spine. Guys like Darren always bet with other people's chips. I sat there in the glass-walled conference room, watching Kyle swipe through his slides. PowerPoint bullets in teal and gray. Somewhere in there was a graph that said I was outdated. He didn't even offer me a severance beyond the bare minimum. Just a folder with HR contact info and a smug little nod. "You should take some time," he said, like I'd just stubbed my toe. "Relax. Travel. Enjoy the next chapter." I stared at the badge, clipped to my chest. The plastic was cracked at the corner. The barcode faded from years of use. I'd swiped into more loading bays and supplier docs than Kyle had birthdays. I unclipped it, along with the keys to the client file cabinets. Yes, actual cabinets. Because not every client trusts the cloud. I set both on the table. Kyle blinked, like he hadn't expected that part to hurt. Then he gave me that tight little smile and added, "You had a good run." But the game's moved on. I didn't say a word. Not then. What was there to say? I walked out of that building for the last time, as if I were leaving a funeral. No mourning. Just finality. Past the front desk where Marla, who'd baked me a birthday pie every November, gave me a confused little wave. Past the bullpen where 2 of my junior reps were pretending not to watch. I nodded once, like a soldier leaving the post. The drive home was mostly silence and the low rumble of tires on asphalt. My phone buzzed a few times, voicemails from restricted numbers. I didn't answer. Somewhere past Tempe, I let my hand rest on the wheel and forced myself to breathe. Not deep, just steady. That's what the old-timers used to say when the machines jammed up on the line. Breathe steady and fix it quiet. Sandra was already home when I walked in. She didn't ask, just slid a cold bottle of Modelo across the counter and went back to stirring the chili. I nodded. We didn't need words. Not right now. Later, when the sun had dipped and the sky went orange-gray, I found myself in the garage. The boxes were still stacked in the corner, labeled by year. Awards, plaques, old territory maps, dust on all of it. I hadn't looked at them in over a decade. I stood there, listening, not to music, not to birds or traffic, just to the sound of nothing. And in that silence, I realized something that cut deeper than anything Kyle could have said. I didn't know who I was without that badge. When you've walked a floor for 29 years, it walks with you. I parked 2 blocks from the office, not because I had to, but because I didn't want to be seen. Habit dies hard. I wasn't supposed to be back, not officially. I still had a few tools, physical samples. Some legacy documentation clients liked having in print. I told myself I was returning them to be respectful. Truth was, I needed to see the place again, needed to look the ghost in the eyes. The lobby smelled the same cheap lemon polish and printer ink. The receptionist, new girl, didn't know me. I signed in like any visitor and walked toward the back where the sales pit lived. Nobody noticed. That stung more than I expected. My name had once echoed through this building like a call sign. Now I was background noise. Darren was in the conference room. I slowed near the glass wall and watched him fumble his way through a client presentation. He was using a pitch deck I'd built a decade ago. Same template, same visuals, even the same damn closing line. Except he delivered it like a guy reading instructions off a microwave. The client, a VP from a major cold pharma distributor, looked unimpressed. Darren didn't see it. Or worse, he did and didn't care. Kyle walked in midway through, grinning, sleeves rolled, no tie. He leaned into Darren's pitch with all the confidence of a man who'd never carried the fallout of a blown delivery. I kept walking. My old desk was occupied. Some intern had a cactus and a Bluetooth speaker in the corner. My nameplate was gone. I left the sample case and binder on the empty cubicle beside it. No note, no announcement. Just evidence I'd ever existed. On my way out, I overheard Kyle laughing behind a closed door. "Tom Ray?" he said, his voice echoing. I'm slightly. Some of the old guys were still selling fax machines. I'm not kidding. A few muffled chuckles followed. I didn't flinch. I just kept walking. You don't waste energy reacting to noise. Later that week, I met Janet Benson from Horizon Med over coffee. She was one of mine. 20-year client. She gave me a hug, looked over my shoulder like she expected someone to be watching, then sat down and got straight to it. "What the hell's going on at Sterling?" she asked. She didn't buy it. She started listing issues, delayed shipments, missing invoices, a shipment of insulin packs that arrived warm to the touch. Horizon nearly pulled their entire line. "We used to trust you," she said. "Not the company. Me." I listened. I took notes. Back home, I started collecting stories. Something had gone wrong in Salt Lake, a mishandled return in Tucson, an entire pallet of temperature-sensitive vaccines left unrefrigerated in Vegas. Darren had rerouted shipments to save money, air to ground, faster to cheaper, but hadn't considered the desert heat. These weren't just mistakes. They were liabilities. Each day I watched the fire grow, and each day I resisted the urge to pick up the hose. They didn't want my help. They wanted me gone. So I stayed gone. But I wrote everything down, the names of clients who'd complained, the contracts Kyle and Darren had altered, the promised specs that no longer matched what was being delivered. I mapped it all like a reconnaissance mission: routes, failure points, witnesses. They thought they'd cut off the head and tamed the beast. What they'd really done was piss off the guy who knew where the bodies were buried. So I watched. I listened. I waited. Some ghosts don't haunt with chains. They haunt with memory. You can't bury a man who still knows where the shovels are kept. I started with a name I hadn't said out loud in 3 years: Carter Doyle, West Coast Pharmaceuticals. He ran one of the tightest ship-to-clinic operations I'd ever seen. Carter didn't waste time with fluff. When I called him, he didn't even say hello. "I've been waiting on you," he said. "We met at a diner outside Flagstaff, the kind of place where the napkins are scratchy and the waitress knows your coffee order by look alone." Carter slid a manila folder across the table before I even sat down. Inside were delivery logs, dates, times, temperature reads, signature mismatches. 3 shipments arrived late, 2 were partially spoiled, and 1 was rerouted through New Mexico for no good reason. "They've cut corners," Carter said, his voice low but firm. "And they're using your name." That last part hit different. Kyle and Darren had been presenting themselves as an evolution of what I built, calling it Tom Ray's Framework, modernized. That's how they got clients to sign without thinking. My track record was their bait. My name was the wrapping on a box full of rot. I reached out to a few more old contacts, careful to keep the conversations short and quiet. No emotion, just questions. The pattern repeated. Product not matching spec. Service windows missed. Storage conditions ignored. It wasn't just carelessness, it was malpractice. Then came the worst one. A 6-figure contract, signed by Darren with a buyer flagged on our internal compliance watch list, a distributor known for back-channel exports. Legal had blacklisted them 3 years ago after an investigation into gray market distribution. Darren either didn't know or didn't care. The ink was dry, and the product had already shipped. That's when I started looking deeper, not just into clients, but into the operations floor itself. Jess was the break I didn't know I needed. 26, bright, fast-moving, worked under logistics. I'd seen her in passing during my last couple years, always quiet, always on time. She reached out to me through a mutual contact and asked to meet somewhere without cameras. We sat on a park bench by a canal trail. She didn't touch her coffee. "They're changing paperwork," she said, eyes scanning the trees like someone might be listening. The specs on refrigerated shipments, compliance tags, sometimes they're backdating inventory logs. I saw one form marked as certified by a manager who was on vacation that week. "Do you have copies?" I asked. She nodded. "I've been documenting it." I wasn't sure what to do. HR doesn't care. Kyle's untouchable. I didn't tell her what to do. I just said to keep it coming. By the second week, I had a spreadsheet full of timestamp conflicts, contracts signed against protocol, missing product inventories, and client complaints dating back 4 months. The deeper I dug, the more it smelled like a cover-up dressed in a quarterly report. Corporate was starting to panic. Whispers of a system-wide audit made their way through the grapevine. Word was, someone from HQ had been flown in to assess damage control. I knew how these things worked. They weren't looking for truth. They were looking for plausible deniability, someone they could throw under the bus if needed. Darren was nervous. Kyle wasn't. He should have been. I didn't take it to HR. I didn't trust them to handle a coffee order, let alone a corporate implosion. Instead, I reached out to Marcus Ellison. He'd been my first regional VP when I joined Sterling. I trained him on our Arizona logistics systems back when he was green and eager. Now, he sat on the board semi-retired, but still respected, still feared. We met at his club. He poured me a whiskey before I said a word. I slid my phone across the table and watched him scroll. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "Is all of this verified?" "Yes," I said, "and there's more coming." He looked up at me, with that old fire in his eyes. "Good," he said. "Let it." So I did. I let it. The truth doesn't need a push once it starts rolling. It just needs gravity. The trap isn't sprung when it's built. It's sprung when they stop noticing it's there. Corporate called it an internal health check. But anyone who'd been around long enough knew what that meant. Quiet walkthroughs, soft interviews, eyes on the financials, the logistics chain, and most importantly, the complaints piling up like trash in a storm. No fanfare. Just 3 people from HQ with clipboards and muted expressions. You could feel the temperature drop on the floor the day they arrived. I stayed off-grid. Jess sent me files anonymously, metadata stripped, timestamps clean. She was careful. Smarter than I gave her credit for when we first met. Every morning I'd open a fresh batch. Altered compliance docs, mismatched inventory logs, emails with Darren's signature where it shouldn't have been. One chain showed a full shipment marked in transit, while it sat in a Phoenix warehouse under a dead AC unit. The temperature log spiked. No one said a word. Then Kyle called me. I was on my back porch watching the monsoon clouds roll in when the phone buzzed. I almost let it go to voicemail. But curiosity won. "Tom," he said, too friendly. "Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I didn't respond. I just wanted to ask. He cleared his throat. "You haven't been talking to anyone, have you?" I could hear the tension under the surface like a guy trying to keep his voice steady while his house burns behind him. "I've been watching," I said. That was all. He paused, long enough to hear the weight of it. Then, with a clipped laugh, said, Well, hey, if you ever want to grab lunch, catch up, you know where I'm at. I hung up. The next day, Darren mishandled a rush order for cryogenics out of New Mexico. Failed to declare it hazardous, shipped it without secondary cooling. When the package was opened, the contents had thawed and refroze, expanding, splitting, leaking onto other goods. The client didn't just scream, they filed a formal complaint. The FDA opened an inquiry. That wasn't something you could sweep into a spreadsheet and hide in a quarterly report. By Friday, one of the largest accounts in our network, the one that built their storage protocols off my original model, sent a cease and desist letter with threat of legal action. In the body of the email, they referenced a line from a 17-year-old memo about product segregation and cross-contamination buffers. There was only one person who could have written it. Me. And that's when I knew the door had opened. The next week, internal memos started leaking. Not from me. From someone inside. One described potential falsification of transit logs. Another outlined escalating exposure due to temperature violations. Word spread through the ranks like gas under a closed door. Then I got the call. Marcus wanted me at the next board meeting. Not as a guest, he said. As a witness. I wore the same suit I used to wear on the road. Back when handshakes still meant something. Walked into that glass tower like I belonged there, because I did. The boardroom was colder than I remembered. Kyle sat at the far end, back straight, lips tight. Darren wasn't there, probably somewhere breathing into a paper bag. Marcus introduced me. No flair, just facts. Mr. Ray has brought us relevant documentation pertaining to the investigation. I slid a flash drive across the table, then laid out hard copies. Emails. Internal forms. Call logs. Product images. Chain of custody maps. Compliance discrepancies. Contract violations. A dozen pieces of evidence, each a nail in the coffin. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't flinch. Just presented what they missed while chasing quarterly targets and weekend tea times. The silence was thick, like everyone had stopped breathing. Later that week, the company held a mandatory town hall. Kyle stood at the podium, face tight, voice rehearsed. He tried to spin it transparency, growth through correction, opportunities for realignment. Then someone handed him an envelope. He opened it mid-sentence. Eyes scanned the first page. His mouth stopped moving. That was the moment. The trap didn't snap with a bang. It clicked, shut, in silence. He called me a relic. So I buried him in history. The boardroom didn't hum with tension, it roared beneath the silence. Not a single chair creaked. The air was full of breath, not yet released. Kyle sat 2 seats from the end, posture perfect, blazer sharp, eyes flat. He thought he was still winning. You could see it in the way he folded his hands. Controlled. Practiced. But he hadn't seen the second page of the packet Marcus passed around. That page carried weight. It listed the service-level violations. It detailed the falsified documents Darren had signed. There were screenshots, email trails, photos of spoiled shipments, a compliance report stamped by the FDA's regional office. Marcus turned the page for the room. Kyle didn't speak. He blinked. Once. Darren tried to explain, mumbled something about legacy systems and vendor miscommunication. But he stopped when someone asked why a blacklisted buyer had been approved for 6 figures of refrigerated pharmaceuticals with zero oversight. His signature was on every line. Darren's silence was his confession. They handed over the financials next. Operating losses, buried under strategic expansion. Refunds, disguised as promotional credits. Bonuses paid out while shipments failed to meet minimum delivery standards. It was all there. Laid bare. A year of arrogance boiled down to line items. Then came the hammer. Breach of fiduciary duty. It was Marcus who spoke it aloud. Clean. Crisp. The way you cut a rope with a blade. Kyle's face finally cracked, then just slightly. The line of his jaw twitched. His eyes scanned the room like he was searching for one last ally. He found none. They paused the meeting briefly. Security entered the room without fanfare. One officer placed a hand gently on Kyle's shoulder. He didn't argue. Didn't yell. just stood and buttoned his jacket like a man heading out for lunch. But his wrists were cuffed before he hit the elevator. One board member followed behind, carrying the folder that would go directly to legal. Outside, the media had caught wind. Someone leaked the audit summary to a tech blog. Within an hour, it hit the trades. Regional manager, ousted, in fraud scandal. By morning, it was on the front page of industry dailies. Kyle's photo press conference smile. Old headshot sat beside a headline he'd never lived down. Darren disappeared that same week. Rumor was, he'd hopped a flight to Cancun, then another to Mexico City. His company laptop was left behind in his apartment, still powered on, with half a resignation letter on the screen. The trust fund couldn't protect him from subpoenas. Last I heard, a private investigator was tracking his billing trail. I didn't gloat. There was no victory dance, no handshake waiting for me at the end of it, just quiet closure, like a final breath held too long, then released. A week after the dust settled, I walked into the office one last time. The lobby was brighter than I remembered. New light fixtures, a wall of fake greenery behind the receptionist's desk. She looked up as I entered and smiled politely. I nodded. The security guard at the back recognized me. "About time," he said, pulling open the inner door without needing to see a badge. I walked down the hallway I used to own. Past the bullpen, past the meeting rooms that used to bear my charts, my projections, my reputation. And there, on the shelf behind Marla's old desk, was my badge, still there. I picked it up, felt the weight of it. The plastic was cracked in the same spot. My photo, older, sharper cheekbones, fewer lines around the eyes stared back. I slid it into my pocket, didn't clip it back on. As I stepped out into the Arizona heat, I didn't feel pride, or sadness, or nostalgia. I just felt done. I didn't want my territory back. I wanted them to remember who owned it in the first place.